Welcome to Using Emotional Intelligence to Drive Successful Change. I am Erin Osborne, Operations Manager with Nexa Learning. I will be working behind the scenes during this afternoon's webinar to monitor your questions and comments in the chat box. As a reminder, this webinar does count as SHRM HRCI credit for full webinar attendance. We will be sending an email with a recording of the webinar and a copy of the PowerPoint and credit codes within the next couple of days. Now, let me introduce you to our presenter, Ade Lewis, an executive coach and program facilitator with Nexa Learning. Ade Lewis is an HR leader with over 30 years of experience in leadership development, talent acquisition, and organizational development. She has designed award-winning programs for a United Nations agency in Vienna and built a full learning and development function in the aviation industry. Her career spans senior roles in banking, manufacturing, government, consulting, and nonprofit leadership. Ade holds a master's in human resources management from the London School of Economics and is a graduate of UNC Chapel Hill's leadership program. Ade, the floor, or should I say the camera, is all yours. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Erin. Welcome, everyone. Thank you so much for joining. We're so glad you joined us. Our session today will be interactive. You can participate by using the chat and reaction features. We will also have quick polls, and at the end, we have the Q&A. If you would like to ask a question at any time, please make a note of your question and bring it to the Q&A. Again, the topic today is using emotional intelligence to drive successful change. So we will start with a poll, and we would like you to please respond. Please select your role from the poll so that we can better tailor today's content to your needs. We'll have the poll come up in a second. So I'd like to welcome all the HR professionals, learning and development, welcome as well, consultants or vendor, and then we have our other colleagues who are joining us as well. Welcome everyone, it's a pleasure to have you. And so our agenda this afternoon, we will start by defining emotional intelligence, and then we'll examine why it matters in change management. To better understand this, we will review activities involved in a change process and identify the emotional intelligence skills applied. You will have the opportunity to ask questions or make comments at the end of this session. And your key takeaways would be the definition of emotional intelligence and its core competencies, the role of emotional intelligence competencies in change management and why this matters. And we will conclude this session by looking at practical strategies for applying EI skills for leading change. Before we delve into this, we have another poll that we would like you to please respond to. How did you first learn about emotional intelligence? Okay, so I see that 40% of us have attended a training workshop in emotional intelligence, which is really good because that would help us to really like walk along as we align those skills to change management. And then another 43% has read books and articles, and then from friends and workers. And we have a very few, 1%, who have not yet learned about emotional intelligence. Yes, we're glad you're here. And so we will go on into the session to talk about what really is emotional intelligence. It is the ability to recognize and manage your emotions and those of others for effective outcomes. Essentially, it means being smart with your emotions, understanding your emotions, how it affects you, how it affects others. And it also promotes the ability to react or respond appropriately to specific situations. And so emotional intelligence is not about being nice all the time, regardless of the circumstances. It's not really about getting emotional or being soft at will. It's not also about denying or stopping emotions, as this can lead to negative outcomes, as we already know, such as an overreaction to an issue, or even an indifference when an input is needed. The good news is that anyone can intentionally develop their emotional intelligence for greater success. Unlike IQ, EQ, which is measured as emotional quotient, can be intentionally developed. And it may appear that emotional intelligence is common sense, but it's not common practice. And that's why we intentionally, talk about these skills. There are many models for the concept of emotional intelligence, as some of us already know. There's the EQI 2.0, for example, developed by MHS. This has individual and leadership assessments that you can take to assess your own level of emotional intelligence in 15 competency areas. It provides each person with a personalized EQ profile and an EQ score. There's also the Daniel Goleman's framework with 4 main competencies, which we'll be reviewing today. We can refer to these competencies as building blocks because they actually build on each other. And so we'll start with self-awareness. According to Daniel Goleman, EQ growth begins with building blocks of self-awareness, self-management, social awareness, and relationship management. Self-awareness is the foundation of emotional intelligence, upon which the other competencies are built. Self-awareness is the ability to consciously recognize and understand our own thoughts, our behaviors, our values, our strengths, our weaknesses. It helps us to understand our own emotions and how our actions affect others. When we're self-aware, we become more in tune with our feelings, emotional triggers, and even our motivation. So if somebody asks you what really motivates you, this is something that with self-awareness, we can really come up with our motivators. So when we see the right opportunities, we can always recognize it. We can develop self-awareness through feedback, behavioral assessment, and personal reflection. And the next competency is self-management. With self-management, we can control emotional impulses before they become overpowering. It's the ability to control our feelings and reactions rather than letting them control us. You would agree with me that sometimes our emotions, they have the power to hijack our behavior when left unmanaged. So with self-management, we can consciously choose how to respond to situations, especially those intense situations, to maintain focus, well-being, and productive interactions. For example, we may all say it's okay to get angry sometimes, but you would agree with me that it takes emotional intelligence to become competent at getting angry at the right person, at the right time, in the right place, for the right reason, and to the right degree. So when we practice acknowledging feelings rather than suppressing them and identifying emotions and their physical and mental effects, we're taking steps to strengthen self-management. And self-management in action, it could involve things like taking a break to calm down before responding to a stressful email, before we hit send, just taking that break to reflect and calm down. It could also involve shifting our perspective to reframe a stressful situation to a positive one, taking deep breaths to control overwhelming emotional impulses, and positive self-talk to regulate our emotions. And so with that, we'll look at the next competency, which is social awareness. Social awareness enables us to perceive, understand, and empathize with the perspectives and needs of others. This helps us to read social cues, navigate group dynamics, and even respond to others inclusively. It involves empathy. Empathy is often described as putting oneself in another person's shoes. So social awareness also involves understanding how broader systems, political undercurrents, and social structures affect different individuals and groups. We can develop social awareness through active listening and a genuine interest in the concerns of others. For example, we might notice when a coworker is overwhelmed or recognize that a team member resisting change may simply need additional support with a new system. So they may not just be, like stubborn or resisting. It may just be that, with additional support, they would succeed with the new system. And so the fourth competency is relationship management. This is the skill to connect, guide, motivate, and influence others positively. It builds upon the other three competencies to transform how we behave and interact with others. Relationship management is the ability to use EI skills and your awareness of emotions of others to interact constructively and build healthy relationships. With these skills, our actions will align with our words in a way that we can create a safe environment where people really feel valued. So a person skilled in relationship management can address disagreements or resistance to change head on without being defensive. Such a person can also be clear, calm, and respectful, even when having a difficult conversation. So now that we have reviewed the EI competencies, the question before us is, why does emotional intelligence matter in change management? And so EI matters in change management because the process side and the people side often coexist in change initiatives. So the process side may be like the technical side, the logical side. And the people side is the psychological side that is loaded with emotions. They coexist, and recognizing this helps us to be able to manage change effectively. Emotional intelligence is therefore critical in change management to navigate the people side of a transition. It is necessary to motivate, to reduce resistance, and to foster resilience. So EI also enables leaders to skillfully manage uncertainty, to build trust, and communicate effectively. This way, employees feel supported rather than threatened. Using emotional intelligence to drive change can promote engagement and a successful adoption of a new change process. So on the flip side, when we ignore the people side, it could lead to significant resistance. It could lead to disengagement, stress, underperformance, and this could be costly to the organization. Now that we have established that relevance of EI to the change process, I would like you to again participate in the next poll. All right, here are the results. 37% have actually led a change, organization-wide change process. That's really good. And about 19% have not. And again, we're glad you're here. 44% of us, they have not led, but they have actively supported the leader of the change process. This is really good. And so we're going to work together to see how we can identify the emotional intelligence skills in a change process. So some of us might have used or heard about change management models such as ADKAR, Porter's 8 Steps, Scott Lewin. These are all very useful in guiding the change process. Today, we will use a somewhat similar but very basic 5-step change process as we discuss why emotional intelligence matters in change. So the 5 steps are: announce the change, gain buy-in, empower people for change, implement the change, and sustain the change. So that's kind of basic and generic. So the process assumes that the stages for initiating and gaining management approval, or senior management approval, or executive approval, as it were, for the change initiative has been accomplished. So the first step we're looking at is for a change manager to announce the change. So now let's unpack this together. Phase 1, announce the change. This is the phase when change is communicated to people who will be affected by the change. A communication plan is recommended to proactively identify what, who, when, how, and where to communicate, especially since the change may be impacting different roles in different ways. While announcing the change, we want to ensure team members understand why the change is needed, and to do this, there may be a need to share critical market threats, for example, and explain how the change will help. The goal here is to communicate what is changing, why, and the consequences or risk of not changing, and then provide opportunities for people to ask questions. Let me tell you a story about Jane. Jane is the new HR director of a thriving engineering company who successfully used EI skills to transition a skeptical department from a traditional performance evaluation process to a continuous feedback model. So to ensure a smooth transition, Jane researched the current and the proposed performance evaluation system and identifying her own assumptions and biases that could interfere with the success of the transition. Instead of relying on mass emails to announce the change to employees, Jane facilitated town hall meetings to inform everyone who would be affected by the change. She evaluated how different roles would be impacted and tailored her why for the change to different groups. At town hall meetings, she explained the need for change by directly addressing employees' frustrations with the current system and highlighting the benefits of the new system. By actively listening to concerns and ensuring timely communication, Jane prevented the spread of misinformation and built awareness effectively across the department. The feedback she received from some of the employees on the town hall meetings encouraged her as she continued towards implementing the change. So that was the first stage. Now here's a summary of what Jane did in phase 1. I'll give you a moment to review her actions that's listed on this slide. So we can now identify how Jane applied AI skills during this phase. With self-awareness, Jane was able to identify her own personal assumptions and biases about the transition process, since this could create blind spots and get in the way of building trust with employees. With social awareness, particularly empathy, Jane chose to meet in person to explain the need for change and answer team members' questions, understanding that resistance often stems from fear of the unknown or fear of loss of control. This also gave her the opportunity to read the room and gauge how well the message was being received. And with self-management, particularly self-control, Jane was able to stay calm and open rather than becoming defensive when faced with pushback. Why do this matter? So just as I mentioned earlier, ignoring human needs during a change process could lead to significant resistance. Recognizing them gives employees the opportunity to feel seen, heard during a transition. So using EI skills helped Jane build trust, credibility, so people will not just go through the motions of change with fear, transition with fear, frustration, and disengagement. And so let's look at phase 2. This is the stage where we intentionally gain buy-in. In Jane's case, to gain buy-in, she identified influential employees as change champions and invited them to lead different aspects of the change process. Employees were able to share ideas freely with their feedback factored into the change process. This gave them a sense of ownership. Jane laid the foundation for trust as she continued to address their concerns patiently. The change champions worked with Jane to spread enthusiasm organically with a focus on what is in it for them and how the new system will reduce their administrative burden. So communicating what is in it for them helps create the personal motivation for employees to engage. Jane and her team listened to the employees' fears without judgment and patiently presented a clear, inspiring vision of the change to motivate people to move from their comfort zone. In some cases, they asked what part of the current process the employee found challenging. And then they showed them how the new system will address this challenge. Jane and her team were able to identify the root cause of people's reluctance, and they proactively addressed those pain points as Jane secured ongoing, visible, and active senior management support. This phase 2, gaining buy-in, is usually critical for the human side of change. Success here will help to gain the emotional buy-in and lay a good foundation for managing the resistance for change. Again, we have the steps laid out. Let's look at the main things Jane did to gain buy-in. I'll give you a moment to read the 6 main points taken by Jane in phase 2. So in addition to the other consequences of self-awareness, self-management, self-control, social awareness used in phase 1, we see that the relationship management competency comes into play. With relationship management, Jane built trust with the change champions and was able to guide and influence them positively. With social awareness and relationship management, again, she secured visible and active senior management support, recognizing that this would positively influence employees' perception of the initiative. With social awareness, we'll see that, especially with a focus on empathy, she listened to understand and address concerns and created a safe place for questions and feedback. Empathy helped her to understand the fears and motivations of employees, knowing that resistance often stems from fear of the unknown. And so an inspiring change vision was presented and it was connected to individual motivations as well. And so we see that these emotional intelligence competencies could actually serve as a kind of a checklist for us that Am I looking at things from other people's point of view, as we proceed in a change process, for example. And then phase 3 is when we empower employees for the change. For this, Jane provided practical support. She equipped them with skills, behaviors, user-friendly tools. She worked with IT to develop systems that would reduce their administrative burdens. And she customized training for managers so they could practice giving feedback. And Jane provided a one-page guide with a template for one-on-one performance check-ins and conducted role-specific workshops, e-learning courses tailored to different skill levels. Employees were paired with mentors for hands-on guidance. Through continued dialogue, Jane and her team recognized some of the employees' resistance stemmed from their fear of losing productivity time. So through active listening, they were able to really understand things from the employee's point of view, and not just assuming that resistance was due to probably like stubbornness. Again, I'll give you a moment to just quickly read through the steps Jane took. That's just a summary of the story I already told you. So it took the use of relationship management to collaborate with IT. Social awareness with a focus on empathy to understand learners' anxieties and differences in learning styles and learning pace. Jane also recognized that empowerment was not limited to skill, but includes the overcoming of fear, anxiety, and previous habits. So resistance may not be due to just unwillingness to change. Active listening to understand learning barriers, and self-management with the patience to manage her own frustrations when learners struggled or resisted. So why does this matter at this stage? Employees could feel anxious or insecure when learning new systems. Again, their frustration could lead to resistance or disengagement. Their resistance to learning can hinder the success of a change process. So getting people to successfully internalize the information during this stage really depends on gaining the emotional buy-in at the first two stages. And then phase 4 is the stage where change is implemented. So to implement change, Jane provided opportunities for trial runs in the practice environment before a full-scale rollout. She continued to listen to employees' feedback to uncover and address physical or psychological roadblocks. When she identified hidden barriers, she provided the support needed. She collaborated with other leaders who tracked the metrics. So they were tracking metrics like error reduction, adoption rates, and they did this to ensure that the skills are being executed properly. When needed, she held regular sessions to adjust processes to align with the established change goals. Jane supported employees who struggled with the new evaluation process and offered additional one-on-one coaching. So that is phase 4. And that's the summary. And so in phase 4, I would like to invite you to identify the EI skills you feel Jane applied, or EI skills that could be applied during this phase. So you can put your comments in the chat. When you think about the EI skills, please put them in the chat. So do we have comments in the chat? Sanchita?
I have a day I see being empathetic.
Okay,
Um,
very good. Okay, I
yeah.
see that as well.
Yeah.
Okay. And so, again, when we look at this, during this phase, Jane continued to actively listen with empathy to identify the hidden barriers like fear of failure. She actively supported employees to reduce such emotional hindrances. With self-management, she remained patient when employees made mistakes or were slow to learn. Having learned through self-awareness that she could not manage the change process based on her own personal biases or assumptions on how long it should take to learn a new skill. Jane ensured that employees who needed assistance were effectively supported. She used relationship management skills to collaborate with other leaders to track relevant metrics. Jane understood that the shift from knowing to doing may be uncomfortable, making emotional support as critical as technical support. We'll now take a look at phase 5, which is to sustain the change, since the change has now been implemented. So Jane successfully used EI skills to transition a skeptical department from a traditional performance evaluation process to a continuous feedback model. She continued to monitor progress to verify that the change was being properly implemented. She identified and addressed reasons for lingering resistance. She acknowledged individuals and teams who consistently demonstrated the new behaviors and skills and arranged for the company to reward desired behaviors. Milestones were publicly celebrated to maintain team morale and momentum. Jane also worked with her team to provide a framework for long-term accountability and integrated the new performance feedback system into the company's talent management strategy. Jane was recognized by the company for her success. She continued to conduct regular check-ins, identified ongoing challenges, addressed roadblocks, and made adjustments when needed. Again, these are the steps that Jane took in phase 5. I would also invite you to mention the EI skill that you think Jane applied or could be applied by anyone else at this phase. You can put the comments in the chat again. And thank you, Beth. I saw that you said self-awareness, self-management, social awareness, relationship management, all apply. And Renee's comment was that EI skills are greatly needed when working in HR and managing employee relations on all levels. I really agree. Yes, absolutely. So we see that social awareness to recognize what is needed to sustain change and prevent employees from reverting to previous behaviors is needed so that you understand, at least that you can understand the social structure and how it impacts behaviors. Social awareness to understand the power of recognition on employee motivation with the empathy to identify the appropriate forms of recognition. Relationship management to engage company-wide support for change evaluation and recognition and integration of change into existing systems. So we see that EI skills are very powerful. And I also see that, I see a comment from Brian as well, agreeing with the importance of this EI skills in change management. So thank you very much for your participation. Just as I have said, we've gone through self-awareness, self-management, social awareness, and relationship management. Let's talk a little bit about the value. So as a recap, so to do a quick recap of the value of EI skills in change management, let's look at this. Self-awareness. Self-awareness can help us recognize our personal biases, our assumptions, and blind spots that could impact change. So a self-aware change manager is better able to exhibit self-management, improve communication, and demonstrate empathy. Again, a point with self-awareness, one of the ways by which we could build this is really putting a name on our feelings. At different points in time, we may be feeling some kind of emotion. And when we put that name on it, because what is needed to manage anger might be different from what is needed to manage embarrassment. So sometimes in customer service, it could be that a customer, for some reason, maybe we say, some things are not available, or the bookings they made will no longer be available, and they're in the midst of a lot of people. When we apologize, we may not realize that there's a little bit of embarrassment that they're dealing with. So putting a name on a feeling would help us manage that feeling. Feelings of fear and anxiety could intertwine in a way that we may not really be able to understand unless we put a name on that feeling. And so through reflection and really understanding ourselves, we'll be able to put a name on how are we feeling right now? What do I feel right now? And then self-management. Self-management helps to manage resistance or conflicts constructively. A change manager skilled in self-management can control defensive reactions to push back. They can lead change initiatives with focus, and they can lead by example and foster credibility and trust. And so, as we said earlier, self-management involves different aspects. It involves emotional self-control, the ability to adapt, that is being flexible in handling change and overcoming challenges. Even the achievement orientation, that is striving to meet or improve standards of excellence. So that keeps us motivated, and a positive outlook, seeing the positive aspects of opportunities and events, and being able to push through, even when we are faced with disappointment. Social awareness. So social awareness enables a change leader to proactively gauge the emotional climate and reasons for resistance. They can identify unspoken concerns and understand diverse viewpoints. This helps to minimize friction, navigate conflict, build trust, and foster collaboration. And so with social awareness, we already mentioned the need for empathy and even organizational awareness as well, reading a group's emotional currents and power relationships. That comes under social awareness as well. And also service orientation, anticipating, recognizing, and meeting the needs of clients and customers' needs. So it takes being able to be aware, but you would see that self-awareness is actually the foundation, and it helps you. If you are not self-aware, it would be very difficult to manage, to self-manage, because you have to know what to manage. And so they build on each other. And the first two really are personal, and then the others is how we relate to other people. So it could be intrapersonal and then interpersonal. And then relationship management. Relationship management ensures a human-centered process rather than a strictly mechanical one. It promotes two-way communication, builds trust, and psychological safety instead of panic and anxiety. It also helps to foster stakeholder alignment and accelerate change implementation. So those are 4 areas that we can look at, and we see the value of EI in change management. When emotional intelligence is applied to the change management process, time wasted on mitigating resistance, managing lack of trust, correcting errors, or even managing conflict can be potentially reduced. Instead, a change could become an opportunity to foster collaboration. It could be an opportunity to upskill. It could be an opportunity to upskill the workforce. It could drive engagement, improve communication, while we're upgrading our systems and processes. So an emotionally intelligent change manager can minimize the pain inherent in a change process and embrace the promise for growth that change brings. And so in summary, during this session, we have addressed the meaning and importance of emotional intelligence, why emotional intelligence matters in change management, and practical application of emotional intelligence to the change process. Taking a look at a case study of an HR director. At this point, I would like to encourage you to think about one thing you will do with the information you have received today. One thing that you would do. I'll give you a moment to think about that. What is that one thing that you would do? So once you've selected that one thing, for the next 2 weeks, that is by the 2nd of June, for the next 2 weeks, could you do 3 things towards achieving that one thing you selected so that you would remember that you, as a result of this session that you invested time in, you were able to achieve that one thing that you did? So as we wrap up, I would love to hear your questions. If we have any questions, I would be more than happy to answer them at this time.
Ade, I have one here. Does EI connect to formal change management models like Cotter or ADKAR or Bridges transition model?
I believe they connect, but I do not know of anyone who has actually structurally connected them. But in different situations, I have laid them side by side, and I've been able to apply them as possibly like a guide. So we could develop a roadmap, along ADKAR and then place the EI skills that we need. It would help us to not overlook some aspects of change. And so to answer the question, I don't know of anybody who's formally or structurally connected them. But yeah, it could be connected. And I also find out that even in personal changes, like personal change, life change, EI skills can be used as a checklist. Take, for example, if we want to move across the country and we have a family, how we communicate the change, and then thinking about the needs of each member of the family would be very helpful.
Another question we have is, how do you create projected outcomes to convince management to invest in EI training?
to convince management to invest
Yes.
in what, please?
And EI training.
Oh, in EI training. So that's like, what's the value proposition? And
Yeah.
so how would you present, the value proposition for EI? I believe that actually looking at the benefits of EI and looking at some aspects of the organization at this point in time. Like, for example, this is not necessarily EI, but to convince an organization to carry out supervisory training, for example, at some point, I have, excuse me, I have to do an analysis of the organization and present to management that 77% of the workforce was being supervised by 18% of frontline supervisors who had no supervisory training. And so it's just coming up with a compelling need, that there's a need for AI. So, for example, it could be the amount of, like some metrics that we measure, because that's the kind of language that would catch attention. It could be turnover rates. It could be things like grievance levels, just things that show that there's a challenge in relationship management in the organization. So it starts with the challenges in that organization. It requires a needs assessment that what are the challenges, like people challenges in the organization. And this is not, it doesn't really have to be a full scale, like maybe analysis, but it's just looking at those challenges. And it could be even a one page, an appendix kind of presentation to say that for this reason, we need the EI. The good thing about AI training also is that because there's an assessment, for example, the EQI 2.0, it's scientific to show people things that they can do to improve their EI. And we can come back in 6 months to find out if these things have been done. So we can really present a case to management that there's an ROI, return on investment, to be expected when we do this EI training.
Great. And I have one other question. What are some resources for professional development on EI to lead with a team? So
Okay.
Resources.
Professional resources. I always emphasize, first of all, the ability to actually take an assessment, because it's different when we read about something or when we actually know about something that relates to us. So for me, a starting point is if there's an assessment that can be taken on EI so that we really understand where we are, and that's the first point of growth. And then there are different books. There's Daniel Goleman's book. It's really very instructive in EI because it actually talks about the source of EI, as in how did it even come about? How they studied, the lives of some people over about 22 years, would be able to come up with the different competencies that they exhibited. For example, self-control, they saw that they were really that particular control group, they were more they had a higher propensity for delayed gratification. And so you could see that impulse control was something that they could exhibit. And they also scored higher in other things related to EI. So it really shows, because again, it's like, where did AI come from? What's the source? What's the basis? How did it start? I think I would recommend Daniel Goleman's book that way. Emotional intelligence.
Any other questions? I do have one more. Does EI improve change fatigue? Is there any research that shows it improves retention?
Sorry, please, can you say that again?
Is there any research that shows it improves retention? Does it improve change fatigue, improve retention?
I don't know of a research that says EI does that, but I know like Gallup does many researches to look into the turnover and to see that simple things like recognition, which takes AI skills, to put in place effectively, improves retention. Like one of the researches by Gallup is talked about the fact that when they did that survey, they found out that the highest percentage of the factor that leads to retention was appreciation. So again, it takes AI skills to be able to know the right time to appreciate the right person and how to go about it. And so there's so many researches that, like we say, AI seems like common sense, but it's not common practice. So AI skills are all over the place, probably not packaged as AI skills. So there's a lot of research showing that this happens. Again, in terms of leadership, it's been shown that leaders who have been derailed were like leadership derailment has been highly linked to the lack of AI skills. And so the question usually is like, can smart people still fail? Like you have very many intelligent leaders who fail because of lack of AI skills. And so technical skills can actually help us to, go up quickly on the career ladder, but lack of AI skills could bring leaders down in an unexpected way. Because when you look at these skills, it's really even social awareness, understanding the context in which you are operating. So yeah, to answer the question, linked directly to change, maybe not, but we see that these skills are actually very relevant to every aspect of management and leadership.
Great.
Then I see a question that says, can tools like EQI and ESCI or 360 feedback be used to measure EI? Absolutely. Yes. The EQI is, I highly recommend it because it not only gives you the EQ score, it tells you exactly what it means. It tells you the implication in the organization. And then it also gives you strategies for action. Exactly something that you can do tomorrow. Like empathy, for example, it could tell you things like, before your next meeting, take time to anticipate the needs of each person attending that meeting, or anticipate their reaction to the information that you're going to present at that meeting. So it has step-by-step information for guidance on how to improve EQ. And not only that, it now looks at the different competencies and shows where there isn't a balance. Because sometimes we want high score in some competencies, but it shows that you have to balance the competencies. So take, for example, it has emotional awareness as one of the competencies. And so, or let's say empathy and emotional expression. So somebody who scores really high on emotional expression may be very happy that they have that high score. But what EQI guides one to understand is that you don't just rely on that high. You look for a balance. Because if there's high emotional expression, that means you can speak clearly about your feelings and opinions, but you scored very low on empathy. Guess what would happen? A lot of what you're saying, you're not even aware of the impact on others. You're not taking into consideration the needs of others. And so it guides you on how to achieve that balance. So that is the way that one can actually improve their own emotional intelligence, emotional quotient, as it were. And it does that for all 15 competencies, so which is really good. And in addition to that, it has a leadership model of transformational leadership, and it aligns the EQ skills that is needed for that. It then identifies the EQ skills that are known to derail most leaders, leadership derailers, and it shows how well the individual embodies those areas. In addition, it shows the EQ skills of a group, of the team, so that I've had teams work together to say, how can we improve our EQ skills? And so I always highly recommend that.
Great. Well, I think that you have answered them all. Thank you.
All right. So I'd like to thank everyone for attending this session. Thank you for spending this hour with us. If you'd like to continue the conversation, please feel free to reach out to us. We appreciate your engagement and the work you're doing in advance to the mission of your organization. Thank you.